what do you mean? Angry, it's our own fault. So he has the view, like those young women, that it's happening because of past actions. They accept that. That's their interpretation of the event. This seems to be that Kabbalah rabbi's interpretation of the event. So therefore his response is according. God didn't get angry. It's not as if he suppressed anger. He literally didn't have it. Those young women didn't suppress anger. They didn't have it. This is too shocking for our minds. And all I'm doing is getting to this point, reiterating the point that we have to unpack and unravel and deconstruct all these assumptions in our mind. Because they're coming from, we've all got our viewpoints. So if you have the view instinctively in your bones that you didn't ask to get born, that your mother created you, then anger would be a perfect response. When some mean person whom you've never met before comes out of the blue and harms you, anger is the correct response. How dare you do that to me? I don't deserve it. That's literally correct. Well, Buddha says it's not like that. You know? Due to your past actions, you're born in that life, you meet that particular person, due to your harming them, they harm you. Same with happiness. Due to your past virtue, you meet these people who are kind and loving to you. But we don't ask that question. Why are good things happening? We only just can't stand the bad things happening. But they're both for the same reason. Your past actions coming in front of you. It's an intense view. It's an intense view. It doesn't seem natural to us even to think this, you know. Of course, in this room, like I said, I'm talking the big picture point of view. Some people will come here and talk about Buddhism, might never mention the word karma. There's plenty in Buddhism besides this. But this is the big picture point of view, and I like that one. Is that a hand? Ronnie, no? What, Ronnie, you had your hand? No? Okay. Because I mean, just for me personally, when I first heard the Buddhist teachings, you know, I'd been brought up a Catholic, then I was an old radical lefty and all that business, you know. And I bumped into these Buddhists when I was about 31 or something, 32. I really liked the talk about the mind, but what I also just really wanted and really heard was this business of karma. It was something that rang a bell. I hadn't heard of it before, I hadn't thought of it before. But that for me was pretty intense. And for me as a Buddhist these last years has been a massively important part of my approach to being a Buddhist, my approach to life. So, because it means it's owning what happens in your life. It's owning it rather than this sense of ego, which is to be feeling like a victim of things. And that's very deep. The more we analyse, I think, how we feel, it seems to me, isn't it? We feel that bad things happen for no reason. And this seems pretty reasonable. This is why there's, I think, so much suffering. Why bad things happen. It's a powerful question. Why do bad things happen? Especially if you're a good person. We go crazy with this. It's a really good question. It's a perfect question. And I think it's so fascinating. We all ask the question, why? I've rarely met a person who doesn't say why, you know. I think it's powerful. Well, we've got lots of answers, you know. Ways to look at it. Yes, Neil.
For me, instinctively, when I suffer, I want to change my past.
You want to what?
I want to change.
Yes, of course, absolutely, naturally.
If someone took on me suffer, first instinct for me is to go away.
That's right, I understand. So exactly.
What actually saying is this suffering is an attachment. It has nothing to do with my decision to go away.
Yes, it does. It has everything Buddha says. It's the reason in the first place you'd even go away.
The suffering.
Yeah, no, the suffering. In your mind, Buddha would say, there is attachment that always... Attachment is a junkie in us that wants things to be nice. Now, we'd call wanting things to be nice normal, wouldn't we? We just think it's natural we want things to be nice. Well, Buddha would identify it as attachment, which is a craving, a neediness. And then as soon as it doesn't get the nice thing, then we'll have aversion to something. And as you said, you'll walk away from it. You won't go and punch and kick and shout, right? Because you look like a patient guy. That's how patient people behave. That's good. That's very sensible. But the logic, the analysis of it is that there is neediness and attachment there that always wants the nice things, which means it wants what Neil wants. So, of course, in our culture, we say that's normal, but Buddha's going beneath what we call normal. He says it's, okay, if you didn't have attachment, put it this way, if you didn't have attachment, this neurotic state of mind deep in your bones, and you were blissful and clear, you'd be blissful, you'd be clear, you'd be wise, you'd be fearless, You would recognize the cake that you don't like, but it wouldn't be a problem for your mind. It wouldn't disturb you. You'd recognize crazy behavior when you see it, and if you could leave it, you would, but it wouldn't disturb you fundamentally in the core of your being. And so if you could, let's say if one of my friends in prison who can't walk out the door, who can't open that cell, then their minds would be happy. Whereas, you know, normal one is, I mean, I think of people in prison, going crazy is totally common because you're not getting anything that attachment wants in prison. You're treated like an animal. The prisons are garbage. You've got maniac cellmates. So unless you know about your mind, people do go crazy, quite literally. So that's a symptom for the Buddha that you've got attachment and aversion there. Whereas if you worked on your mind, you wouldn't have attachment and you wouldn't have aversion, and that's advanced. Therefore, you'd know that guys are crazy, but you wouldn't lose your own sense of clarity. You wouldn't lose your own sense of space or peace, and you would have compassion as well. Now that's advanced, but that's the consequence. That's how we can become. Are you with me here, Neil? So not having aversion, not having anger, that's amazing. I mean, I admire people who don't have anger. But also, the aversion arises. Like seeing the ugly thing you'd see definitely is not what you want, which is why you'd walk out the door. It's common sense, but also it's your way of handling when attachment doesn't get what it wants. You walk away from it, which is intelligent. But aversion did arise, and maybe a person like you, some patient people, get a tendency to be depressed. Do you experience depression at all? Yeah, that's what happens. The Buddhist view is, if you can try and imagine it like this attachment and aversion are like these very linked states of mind. Attachment's the default mode. It's always wanting the nice things. Every second, every second, every second, every second. The millisecond it doesn't get it, that's the arising of aversion. In someone like me who's very volatile, I would shout and yell. Someone like you, the aversion would arise, but it would go internally. And then one day you can't get out of bed one morning because you're so depressed. Because your aversion is internal, and because everything builds up, even throughout one day, you know, there have to be 100 things that happen that our attachment doesn't like. The red light, the annoying sound, you drop the cup when you did the dishes. Immediately this, you know, annoyance pops up. Annoyance, irritation, upset, aversion pops up. Well, you'd be sort of more floating along with it, but it goes in. Every time your mind does anything, it stays in the mind. You build it up, build it up, build it up. So internalized aversion manifests as depression. You're inert one day. Are you seeing what I'm saying? It's real subtle. And that's why ever more subtly we have to learn to recognize what's in the mind. So even just dropping something, we're so ridiculous. We curse ourselves, or we get upset, or we feel guilty. And I think it's because we program mummy in our head, and mummy says you shouldn't drop things. So mummy's still in your head, you know. So you get annoyed or guilty when you drop something. So at that second you would deal with it. It's okay, Neil, I can drop another thing, you know. It's all right. It's okay, honey. So you straight away counteract it. And that's a simple example. So if you counteract what arises in your mind every day and sort it out, by the end of the day, there's nothing left over. You haven't left any residual rubbish, you know. Okay, this dealing with it goes to very subtle levels. But even on a fairly gross level in our day-to-day, if we handle the thing when the red light comes, instead of getting all frustrated, relax, Robina, it's just a red light, it's okay. Even a little bit opposing it with an argument in your head, being your own therapist, then your mind's more steady. Your mind becomes less, you're not building up so much junk. You understand what I'm saying? That's how it works at an ever more subtle level, you know. Because this attachment's always there. Always this junky in us that always wants something more, needs something to be how it wants, you know. Are we communicating, people? But so the hard part, like I said, it's not as if attachment comes with a pure state of attachment and then a pure moment of love. They come together. And this is where it's a minefield, you know. In other words, we only really are attached to those we love, and we only love those we're attached to. But they're utterly, utterly different states of mind. Utterly, completely different. If you had a raw moment of attachment, you'd be like a little vampire. You know, if you had a total moment of complete love, you'd be utterly blissful, and it'd be astonishing empathy with the suffering of another. But we have them together. This is why it's a minefield. You can't see one bit from another. And the only time I notice I'm attached is when Neil doesn't do what my attachment wants. So there's this, you know, in the different, all these different techniques that we talk about in Buddhism. So when you discuss in the later stages, in the more advanced stages of practice, which is where you talk about compassion, because the Buddhist idea is you've got to work on yourself first, you know. Compassion is actually more advanced. It sounds like many of us think of spiritual as compassion. It is love and compassion. But you can only really develop genuine love and compassion when it's based on this first stages of practice. That's how they talk about it. So right now, let's say if we think of the world, there are three categories. There are those people, sentient beings, who do what you want. They're called friends, roughly speaking. There are those who don't do what you want. We call them enemies, or we might use that word, but it's a good word in this context. And then there's a third category who do neither harm you nor help you, and they're called strangers. Well, there's no fourth category on this planet. There's those sentient beings who fulfill your attachment's needs. There are the sentient beings who don't, and there are sentient beings who do neither. So on the basis of that, how do we feel about these three groups? Well, you adore your friends and you love them and want them to be happy and have compassion for them. That's great. But as long as they do what my attachment wants. I have aversion and upset and hurt and irritation and anger towards those who actually really consciously don't do what my attachment wants, the ones who harm me. And then for the strangers, we couldn't care less. They could all drop dead. It's 99.9% of the universe. So I kind of use this funny analogy, and I can say it, Neil. So I've never met Neil before. And Panos is his friend. And Panos tells me that Neil gets these terrible migraines. And for me, Neil is a stranger. He's the bloke down the road, okay? Well, I'll go, oh, the poor thing, does he really? But I won't go very much further because he's a stranger. I don't have much empathy for strangers. We sort of do our best. Oh, it reminds me, one time in my iPad, here's my iPad. I carry everywhere my iPad and I read all my newspapers, right? Because I travel, I don't have any paper, you see. So I read my New York Times. And down on the corner, I saw the heading in the corner. All the headings of the New York Times are mostly Mr. Trump these days. So it's just unbelievable. Apparently the New York Times and all those good papers in America, they've increased their subscriptions by tenfold since Mr. Trump, Right. The ACLU, that American Organisation for Civil Liberties, they've increased their subscriptions by 400%. And Mr. Trump's doing a lot of good, apparently. Seems like it, since Mr. Trump. Anyway, on the corner, the right-hand corner story, I noticed out of the corner of my eye, it said 350 people die in ferry accident in Tasmania. Well, Tasmania is my people, right? My friends, they're my people, Australians. I went, oh, no. And then I saw that it said Tanzania. And I went, oh, that's okay. I mean, do you understand? Why? Because they're strangers. Then I had to of course I had to have compassion. I read the story. I tried to imagine where Tanzania was. You get my point? It's very natural. The whole world, we divide them all. The monkeys and the ants and the humans, we all have our friends, our enemies and our strangers, So there's Neil. He's a stranger. So Panos, whose friend he is, tells me about his headaches, and I try to sound compassionate, but it doesn't last long. It doesn't really touch me, does it? Because he's a stranger. Now let's say I meet Neil and we fall in love and he moves me in. Do you understand? Suddenly he's now in the friend category, isn't he? Now look how compassionate I am and look how much I love him. And I have compassion. I will stay up all night. I'll spend my money on getting doctors to help his migraines. I will have such compassion for him with his migraines. I'll have such love for him. We understand this is totally normal. We take it for granted. Because now I'm in love with him. Now I'm attached to Neil. I have massive interest. Because of my attachment, I have vested interests now. So the love and compassion are overwhelming, isn't it? We understand this. We don't even question it, do we? Now let's say Neil throws me out, and moves in Ronit. Well, now what category is he in now? Under the enemy. I hope he suffers from his boring old migraines. I mean, speaking simply, we understand this. And our world is divided like this. This is natural. But the Buddha is saying it's because of attachment, So the point is this. In this meditation, later on we'll discuss it, the aim is to try and recognise that enemies, friends and strangers are equal. They're all completely equal in not wanting to be happy and wanting suffering. They're all not wanting suffering and all want to be happy. It's logical. So think about it, logically. When Neil was my stranger, I bet you asked him, how are your migraines? He would tell you they're unbearable. And then when he's my friend, ask him about his migraines. He will answer in exactly the same way. And when he's my enemy, it's exactly the same. So the friend, enemy, stranger are complete fabrications of our mind that we dump on top of people on this earth. All based on whether or not they fulfill my needs. I mean, we should be embarrassed by that. It's so self-centered. But we think it's normal. Well, this is what? Because attachment. Attachment, if he does what my attachment wants, I adore him. I love him. Of course I do have love, and of course I have compassion. But as Lama Zopa says, it's unstable. It's based on attachment, which makes it sound that we're really cruel and self-centered. Well, that's Buddha's point. We are. But we just think it's normal. To really analyse these deeper states of mind, you know. So way to go in changing them, but just talking the principle here. So how we literally project our own needs. The normal way we are now, Buddha calls this samsaric, is we are seeing everybody on this planet through the lens of our needs. So if they fulfill my needs, I'm prepared to love them. If they don't, if they actually harm me, then it would sound bizarre to say that you love your enemy. You sound like a wacko person, you know, like she's a bit mental. Because the natural one for us, because they do not fulfill attachment's needs, and they indeed have harmed me. You can say that. Look at the world, the suffering that happens is unbelievable, what people do to each other. So this one of compassion is really outrageous. It's much more advanced, you know. So the way the first point for the Buddha is to learn to recognize how these states of mind harm ourselves. Then we can have some stability in being, you know, in developing, going beyond these lenses of attachment, aversion, and ignorance. And seeing people for who they are. Seeing Neil from his point of view. Whether I label him friend, enemy and stranger, he does not feel a fraction of difference. That is my projections onto him. We can see this, it's logical, but it's kind of scary. To have the same empathy for your enemy as you do for your friend sounds almost mental illness for us. It sounds weird, you know. And that comes eventually though. Buddha's view says it's possible. And the other reason too to have compassion, the compassion is like those young women, those young nuns. That's too shocking for our mind. And of course we had compassion for our torturers because we realised we'd harmed them in the past and because they will suffer in the future from their own harm. That's intense, you know. So it's like one step at a time, you know. One step at a time. One step at a time. So what role then does so-called meditation have in all this business? Well, there's many techniques, many kinds of meditation, millions of techniques actually. But there's two main modes of meditation. And the one that is the commonest one that people have a vague idea about, known as mindfulness, which is just what it's become known as. But it's actually, like I said, it's this technique. It's a psychological skill. It's not religious in its nature at all. It's learning to concentrate, learning to focus, learning to go against the berserk tendency to have the mind go all over the place, which of course we understand perfectly well. We know that. So it's a skill. So again, like I said, there are various misconceptions about it. You can have your own meditation. Buddha doesn't own the word meditate. It's just that, you know, there's this technique that's come from these Indians that he uses. So from the Buddhist perspective, I'm just talking here, you can decide what you like as meditation. People can do what they want. Like I said, Buddha doesn't own this word, but Buddhist meditation, to understand it properly, there's two main modes. And the first one is the one we commonly think of. So, you know, like I said, there's many misconceptions about it. One of them is it's an alternative to a pill, which means we only do it when we get a headache. Well, the analogy is that the only time we think to meditate is something goes wrong. That's complete misconception. The Buddhist approach is we ought to all learn it from the time we get tiny, you know. It's a skill to help us focus the mind so you can step out of your head, so you can begin to observe the contents of your own mind and distinguish between the neuroses and the goodness. Speaking really simply, that's the practical application of this technique in day-to-day life. So the first thing is to learn to focus. And even, you know, 3 minutes a day of this. Often what happens is people sit down and do mindfulness meditation for 20 or 30 minutes. And if you don't know what you're doing, then most of the time it's just ignorance. Most of the time you're just spacing out. So the point is this technique, as I'm saying, is a really rigorous skill to enable you to focus the mind, which implies not follow every thought. It is not an alternative to a pill. It is not a relaxation technique. This is a really important point. You know, if you're driving on the freeway at 120 kilometres an hour, you need intense focus. There's absolutely no question. You need intense focus. You can't afford to lose the plot for 1 millisecond. You'll be dead. That's the level of focus you're trying to cultivate. It sounds like hysterical saying it like that. Because why? Because the tendency of the mind to wander all over the place is profound. So it's really intense to learn to focus the mind. So relaxation technique, we need them. We're really berserk. We need relaxation techniques. There's no question. And so there's lots of them. Yoga has got wonderful relaxation techniques. We need them badly, but this is not that. So important to know this. It's to focus the mind, which simply means attempting not to follow every thought. And we know the thoughts are there continuously. That's why when we start to do this technique, you think your mind is getting worse. You think you got more thoughts. No, you haven't. You're just noticing them. And that's excellent. Don't think you had a bad meditation. You had a good meditation. Because if the job is to become familiar with your own mind, then another misconception about meditation is to make all the thoughts go away. That's like making the pain go away. But that's not helpful. As you advance in this technique and you've gone to more subtle levels of focus, you will indeed be beyond conceptuality and the sensory. But that's super advanced. You might get moments of that, but that doesn't necessarily mean you had a good meditation. The goal of this technique is to focus. Why? So you can stop following blindly every feeling and thought without any awareness. So you're stepping out of your head, if you like, for 2 or 3 minutes. And that's incredible. So you're learning and then eventually you're learning to you're paying attention to the thing you'll concentrate on. You'll anchor your mind to the breath. You might just choose to use as the object of your meditation the breath. It can be anything, but the breath is a really simple example. The sensation coming out of your nose, you know? We'll do it a little bit later. You're focusing on something. You've got to anchor your mind to something. So naturally, so what's going to happen? Okay, the 2 main obstacles, and when they describe this technique in the text, and this is going back to the Indians, then it's described in terms of 9 stages of cultivation of this concentration. And the most advanced level is kind of beyond for us. If you were to see a person who had accomplished this single-pointedness, they would look like they were dead. They've literally gone beyond the conceptual and the sensory. Which is why we think it's cosmic, you know, but it's not. Because we're talking, remember here, subtler levels of our mind that we never access. So the 2 main obstacles to getting any focus at all is the 2 tendencies of the mind to either be over chatty and never stopping, overexcited, the thoughts going, which is what we know happens, or the other tendency to space out, for the mind to be dull. So it's either the mind to be overexcited or the mind to be dull. Now some people can sit and be very peaceful in their mind for 5, 10, 20 minutes, But you could argue that they're just spacing out. And that is not the purpose. That's just feeling good, and there's nothing wrong with it. It's called relaxation. But that's not the purpose here. So you've got to have this real clarity about what you're trying to achieve, which is a state of super focus, that isn't all berserk, and focus that is calm without the mind spacing out. And it's almost impossible initially. But that's what you've got to understand what you're trying to accomplish, And starting with even 3 minutes is really excellent. It's fantastic. So I'd say, the long-term goal of this technique is to access these subtler levels. And to do that sincerely, you've got to give up sex, drugs and rock and roll and go to the mountains for a couple of years, You've got to be already pretty highly advanced to get this focus. You've got to have given up any interest in food, sex, stuff, mortgages, girlfriends, children, jobs, all the rest. You've got to be pretty advanced already to sincerely go to the mountains, or go, metaphorically speaking even, to really get this focus. You've got to be intensely involved. Some of my friends are spending their lives doing these meditations, so that you can get the focus, so you can do the real job of unpacking and unraveling the contents of your mind. That's the purpose of it. So the main obstacles are the mind to be berserk, excited, which is this typical model. As soon, you know, when you're wide awake and wound up, your mind's berserk, isn't it? But there's a kind of a clarity there, which makes us get things done, you know. That's a good quality. We've got to stop the mind never stopping. It never stops, never stops. And this is utterly, utterly, utterly natural for us. There's no concept in any, I think, in any of our materialist models of the mind that would suggest there are techniques coming directly from Western psychology to help you focus your mind. There might be some, but the level to which they say we can do it is quite astonishing. And then the other extreme is the mind spacing out, becoming dull, which is a very pleasant feeling, but it's like ignorance. It's not clarity at all. So what I'm getting at is this. That's the long term, is to get concentration. But I'd say for most of us, the immediate benefit of watching your breath for 3 minutes, 5 minutes, 2 minutes, 4 minutes, whatever, you know, be humble about it. The real benefit is that because you're training your mind. You know, it's like, it's like you're in a room with 100 people and you're really excited to hear everything those people are saying. So you're like a little bird going around. He says this, she says that, and this is an analogy for our thoughts, okay? Our head is full of 100,000 voices. And we normally just kind of go along on autopilot, doing the dishes, doing this, driving the car, and we're just chatting away, chatting away, chatting away. 99% not conscious. We know that. It's only when something intense has happened that the conversation goes berserk, isn't it? The pain, the hurt, the happiness, whatever. But most of the time, we're absolutely unconscious. Absolutely unconscious. And we call that natural. Okay, so for 3 minutes, you're making this strong determination, like you're in the room of 100 people and you're going to watch that spot on the wall and you refuse to get distracted. So that means you've got to just pay attention to that spot. It's just an analogy, okay? And you're not going to get distracted. That's what you're aiming to do. I'm not going to get distracted by anything else. No matter how delicious things are, no matter how ugly things are, I will just say focus on that spot on the wall. It's like that, except the spot on the wall is your own breath with your eyes closed, you know. It sounds so easy. Technically it is easy, but to accomplish it even reasonably for 2 minutes is intensely difficult because of our absolute addiction to launch, to dive into the thoughts. We're driven by those thoughts so intensely, you know. So strongly. We just wander off, have all these conversations. We're addicted to that. That's attachment energy. It always wants to find something nice to think about, you know. So to focus, to intensively focus just on that breath, and then have another part of your mind, every time you wander off, you bring it back to the breath. You bring it back to the breath. You bring it back to the breath. That's the technique. It's not holy in its nature. Do not have any expectation of suddenly thoughts going or having a vision or feeling good. This is like ridiculous. It's not the point. It's not the point. It's not the point. The point is to get some focus. So then it could get moments when it's really focused. You could get moments when suddenly your thoughts will kind of stop. You have a very nice feeling. You could. They're like bonuses. They're not the goal. They're not the goal. The goal is to focus your mind. So the benefit of this in your daily life is that because you're training yourself to not follow every thought blindly, then you become more conscious in the background of all the thousands of thoughts. Don't think that's bad. That's good. That's the goal. Because now you can begin to hear all the crazy thoughts, which you didn't think you had before. One of the commonest feelings is as you start to meditate, you think you're getting worse. But you're not. Even in the Indian texts, they talk about in the traditional presentations of this technique in terms of 9 stages of cultivation. Pabonka Rinpoche says that, you know, one of the signs of success at the first of the 9 stages of this cultivation of concentration, you think you're getting more conceptual. You think there are more thoughts. No, it's because you're just noticing, and that's excellent. Because in daily life, that's what we need to be doing effectively. The reason to have concentration is so you can work on your mind and see what's happening. And that goes ever more deep, ever more deep, ever more deep. Because these voices inside us, these thoughts are so tightly packed. And the ego voices are so tricky. You know, it's so hard to distinguish the ego voices from the virtuous thoughts, you know. I call them voices, it just means thoughts. Are we communicating here? Any questions? Any questions? Oh, is that a sigh?